Well, we've worked with many of the companies. I've worked with so many of them on this. I've had many roundtables, as the business secretary, and they've very much welcomed the work that we've been doing on making sure that people...
You must be able to name a few. Economic activity at risk. I'm just saying, do you think you would have a rethink on it?
Well, I think that there was an imbalance, and we spoke to many businesses. They've been working with us to get the Employment Rights Bill forward.
Can you name a company, a few of them, that have welcomed these proposals? Because I can name all the companies, the recruitment companies, Hayes, Manpower, Randstad. They've signed the letter saying this is the wrong approach. You're going to put jobs at risk. Which are the companies that have welcomed your employment rights?
Remember when politicians claimed to stand for the working class? Watch Angela Rayner squirm as she's confronted about her £94,000 salary, while ordinary Brits struggle to pay their bills. This isn't just another political gaffe, it's a masterclass in hypocrisy from a former trade unionist now happily accepting a 2.8% pay rise while telling the public to tighten their belts.
As opposed to, for example, on the probation periods when we listened to what business said. So we have the probation periods as well alongside the balance of rights from day one.
Will you get me a list of those companies and then we can call them and say, do you welcome Angela Rayner's proposal?
Well, like I say, I've spoke to many companies, we've had many roundtables with them and we've been discussing it, and they've acknowledged that there has to be a balance and broadly welcomed it. We've made changes. Well, there's been many of the companies that we've worked with, like I say, so many of them.
Her painful stammering speaks volumes about Labour's true priorities. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I've been very clear that Labour is embarking on a once-in-a-generation project to unlock growth in our regions and shift power out of Westminster and into local communities.
On her plans to deliver 1.5 million homes in this Parliament, a 50% increase from the 50-year record levels delivered by the previous government.
Not quite sure where the benches opposite are. I can't quite figure out whether the Conservatives agree with it or whether they don't agree with it by that response, Madam Deputy Speaker. But
remember when politicians actually had to answer tough questions? These days, it seems like our elected officials have mastered the art of dancing around difficult topics, offering vague non-answers while smiling for the cameras. But occasionally, a journalist manages to catch them off guard, revealing what's hiding behind the polished facade. Angela Rayner's recent interview is a perfect example of this rare political honesty, though not by her design. When confronted about the eye-watering 2.8% pay rise that MPs are set to receive, boosting their already substantial salaries to £94,000 per year, Rayner crumbled under questioning. The figure itself is staggering when you consider the average Briton earns around £30,000 annually. That's right. MPs will now earn more than 3 times what the typical worker brings home, all while telling those same workers to tighten their belts during a cost of living crisis. Rayner's response was nothing short of painful to watch. Her carefully constructed image as a champion of working people suddenly collided with her newer reality as a defender of parliamentary privilege. The cognitive dissonance was written all over her face as she stammered through a defence that made less sense with every word. I think that's right that a worker should be paid it. That's a principle that I absolutely believe in, she declared, seemingly oblivious to how this statement would land with millions of Britons struggling to make ends meet. The disconnect was jarring. Here was a former care worker who once fought tirelessly for equal pay, now squirming uncomfortably, while effectively arguing that she and her colleagues deserved their generous compensation package. Her body language told the real story. As the interviewer pressed harder, Rayner's usual confident demeanour evaporated. She shifted in her seat, her verbal stumbles increased, and the trademark directness that her supporters admire disappeared entirely. This wasn't the fiery trade unionist ready to go to battle for workers' rights. This was a politician caught in the headlights, desperately searching for an escape route. The most telling moment came when Rayner fell back on the technical excuse that MPs have no control over their pay increases. While technically true, as these decisions are made by an independent body, it's a convenient truth that masks a deeper hypocrisy. If Labour MPs genuinely believed the increase was inappropriate during a time of widespread financial hardship, nothing prevents them from refusing the extra money or donating it to charity. We've seen true leadership on this issue before. During the 2008 financial crisis, several MPs voluntarily took pay cuts or declined increases to show solidarity with the public during tough economic times. These politicians understood that leadership sometimes requires sacrifice, not just empty rhetoric about being in it together, while pocketing increasingly generous salaries. The fundamental contradiction in Rayner's position couldn't be more glaring. Her assertion that workers should be paid what they're worth might sound reasonable in isolation, but context matters. When millions are seeing their real wages stagnate or decline despite working harder than ever, such statements from a politician about to receive nearly £94,000 a year ring hollow, even offensive. This painful interview reveals something far more significant than just an awkward moment for Rayner. It exposes the growing chasm between Labour's promises to working people and their comfortable political reality. The party that once proudly represented miners, factory workers, and the struggling masses now seems increasingly comfortable with its privileged position in the corridors of power. What does it say about Labour's priorities when their deputy leader can't offer a straight answer about her own compensation? If they can't be honest about something as straightforward as parliamentary pay, how can the public trust them on the complex economic challenges facing the nation? The stammering, the evasions, and the weak justifications suggest a party that has lost touch with the very people it claims to represent. This incident isn't just about Rayner, or even about the specific pay rise. It's about accountability and the relationship between the governors and the governed. When politicians start to view their elevated status as an entitlement rather than a privilege granted by voters, democracy itself begins to fray at the edges. What we're seeing in this Rayner interview isn't merely an embarrassing political gaffe. It's a perfect illustration of how quickly champions of the working class transform once they're nestled in the comfort of Westminster. The data doesn't lie. Public trust in politicians continues to freefall, with citizens increasingly feeling that those in power live in a different reality. You can hear this frustration in the reactions to Rayner's interview, where ordinary Brits expressed outrage at politicians receiving generous pay increases, while families struggle with the cost of living crisis. This growing disconnect between the political elite and everyday citizens explains why so many voters feel abandoned by the entire system, when Labour politicians can't even maintain their principles on something as straightforward as their own compensation packages. It raises a disturbing question. What other promises will they conveniently forget once they've secured power? The Rayner interview isn't just embarrassing, it's a warning.